Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Honor the Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Ledford, and today I have Shannon Willis with me, and we all know that when two Shannons get together, it can be very potent. So, we begin with an oracle card, and today it's from the Earth Warriors Oracle by Alana Fairchild. And what came forth today was Cherokee from the Maori tradition in New Zealand, and she's a guardian of the divine feminine. And she represents the sacred, empowered relationship with Mother Earth. And she speaks to the rhythm of our own sense of timing. And within the Maori tradition, humans, we are part of the natural world with a sacred role to protect and preserve. And she feels like the perfect companion for my relationship to this conversation today with Shannon Willis. So Shannon, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
So share yourself with us. Tell us a little about you.
So I have been walking on the earth now for 50 years. So I celebrated my birthday yesterday, and wow, what a ride.
It gives me chills.
So I came into the world through my mother and my father, so Omo Jeanette. Originally, my peoples are from Louisiana, and that ancestry that they are part of are French and Irish, English, and about 3 different First Nation tribes. That we've been able to track lineage-wise that feel vibrant, all of which, through the ancestor work that I've been doing over the past 4.5 years, all of those lineages are equally relevant and important and deserving of honor in the way that kind of I move my body of work and my own lineage with a 17-year-old son here that I have forward in the world. So my background has mostly been through psychology. I have my master's degree in counseling, and I worked specifically in the pathways and the avenues of domestic violence advocacy and social justice for about 25 years across 3 different states. So I've done a lot of consulting and a lot of leadership roles and boards and executive directors of battered women's programs across Louisiana and Georgia. And always in that work, it was interesting before I came to really honor the unseen forces that were moving me in that direction, was the sense that people would always kind of say, "You've got a little bit of a witch in you. What's that about?" And being raised predominantly Roman Catholic, of course, it would be like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." But yet this yearning and this sense of belonging came to me to kind of relocate and move to Georgia, which is where I am now, where I have been for the past 8 years. So when I landed here, it was interesting how it just activated. I found out that a lot of my ancestors actually came from North Carolina, and they lived around South Carolina and Georgia. So there's a real potent tending to like being back in touch on the land where your ancestors, where their bones are in the earth. And I definitely feel like it pushed me in a way to where I left, and I'll never forget that, when I was the VP of programs for a really large program, and I walked out, and my CEO was like, "You're leaving a 25-year history of domestic violence advocacy to do Reiki? What are you doing?" And I'm like, what I have to. So this sense of that spirit was asking me to change course directions and walk fuller into this unknown path of destiny. And of course, through that work, I met the big prayer. I'm a praying woman. And so the big prayer came like, okay, if you want me to embrace this, like I need both seen and unseen mentors and leaders. And then the world opened up to all of these magnificent in human skin teachers such as Daniel Four and Robinette Kennedy and Gail Gullick and Robert Moss and Bola. And so I just started training vigorously about 5 years ago, just entrenching in the work that brings me to speak to you now. So I, along with a really good friend of mine, did a very bold thing, and we opened up a center for healing, loud and proud, in the corner of a warehouse district where lots of people can see us. And most of the workshops at the time, 5 years ago, were all being done kind of on the East Coast in people's homes. And you didn't really speak about spirit work out loud and in community. And so we just really kind of listened to that call and opened it up. And I'm also celebrating the 5th year of Heart Path being visible in the world. As of August 1st, that will happen. So beautiful. Lots of change very rapidly.
Lots of change very rapidly. It feels like the pace of how things are changing really rapidly.
And need to change very rapidly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's almost both and. Things are changing really rapidly, I feel like, individually and collectively. And yet sometimes on the surface, when you're turning a big ship, it looks like it's not moving at all.
Shay, exactly. It's true. Or and it's not moving fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you look at it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you speak a little about, I know a lot of your work is around the mother wound and the pain and grief that we pass on down lineage. And can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So part of that, a big piece of that work is doing, of course, the ancestor work that was developed by Dr. Daniel Four. And in that, we're addressing those 4 primary lineages, 2 of which are feminine and 2 are masculine, sourcing from our father's fathers and our mother's fathers. There, as you heal up those wounds, there's a sense of felt that they're well in spirit, but also that they need platform, and there's stuff to say around the things that are lighting us up in our reality, around issues that made some of our ancestors ghosts, made it hard for them to come to an elevated place. And those, of course, got stuck around the issues of like colonialism and racism and patriarchy. And so for me, in just the vibrational energy of tending the matrilineal lines, the first 2 of which were my father's mother's and my mother's mother's line, the elevated guides that we meet through the process, and also more so, I'm listening, I have to also, my mother's father's mother spoke in and came in a lot around that process, around the wounding of the feminine through patriarchy and the effect that wounding had on how women are in relation to other women. So that resonated with me because my life's work had been in the field of domestic violence and battered women's shelters, and seeing through the course of that work the horizontal hostility that happened in the shelters between battered women towards each other, and just how tragic that was. So there's a lot of material there, and how we can project harm and shame and hurt onto each other, because it's not safe to direct that wounding where it appropriately belongs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk a little about those steps to start healing? Like there's the ancestral mothers, and as we're doing the ancestral work, and can you talk a little bit about what that starts to look like how it began to shift maybe for you?
Okay, so the meeting, it's interesting that I met an ancestral guide when I was healing up the lineage of my mother's people and my mother's mother's people. But when I asked for her to speak to what happened on the line, like how did the women adjust to patriarchy and oppression, actually another guide came forward that could speak to it better on both lines. And so the first step for me was coming to understand and be in really good sacred space with that guide and having her fully see me and how I am embodying the story of the wounding around the patriarchy on that line. Like, so how it's activated and alive for me. And so in each of the feminine lines, there's that story of the wounding that we carry through patriarchy, and it's understanding how it plays out, because it plays out differently in each line. And I really feel like the biggest and the most beautiful part of the ancestral work is coming in connection with these elevated ancestors that can give us the backing and the wisdom for our lives as we're moving through their gifts as well as their burdens. So that's I think the very first step is just trying to understand what happened, like on that particular line, and how it has, how it manifests in my life. And of course, that process will light you up. You will then be able to see all the ways in which that becomes true and how it's projected out in your relationships and waking life. And then that second piece becomes, as you start to see that, you really have to do that inner work, right? You really have to do the inner work along with pulling in the assistance of the guides and also doing deeply embodied grieving rituals, forgiveness ceremonies to transmute those pains. And so that, I believe, is a catalyst to heal, to do that work within ourselves to heal. So I take a kind of varied approach. And what I like about the work is it's dismantling the wounds of patriarchy. And while it's doing that, it deeply holds the sacred masculine as divine. And so in it is no anger towards the man. Like, that's not helpful. So sometimes you'll see when people address patriarchy, it also comes with this dark shadowness of like, men are bad, men are awful. And in this, through a divine healed guide, there's none of that. She's balanced. She's got that equal balance of divine masculine and feminine. And that understanding of that, how that wound also related and transmuted to the sons, to the grandsons, and in the true honoring the sovereignty of woman and Mother Earth, there's like love for all at the table. And so the work that I've been doing around that for the past 2 years, and the participants that have come to me to do the specific work with the mother wounding on the ancestral lines, has been deeply transformative, not only in their relationships with other women that they are either in their families or their friends, but also with their husbands and their fathers and their sons.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful around feeling into, like, pulling apart how different lines bring different parts of that kind of wound. Because I think sometimes what happens is it all gets into this crinkled, enmeshed part of us, and then it's almost impossible. It feels impossible to address. And so as we start to lay it out, yeah, and to speak to both the masculine and the feminine of it, you don't just work with the women's lines. It's like you work with your father's line and your mother's father's line too, so that there's a harmonizing of all of it.
That's right. And you can't, like for me, like it's almost that be careful what you ask for sort of thing. So as I was trying to track this particular energy that comes up in a dynamic in a relationship within my family, I'm like, I go to my ancestors and I'm like, where is that sourcing from? Like, I need some like outer world palpable way I can track where it came from. And they listen. They're like, oh, okay, you want that? And then through my niece came an ancestor that we tracked, and it's a line that's like my 9th generational ancestral grandmother on my mom's dad's line. So way back, like we're talking past the 16 circle, but into the 32s, like way back. and there it was, like the historic story of what happened around the wounding of this ancestral grandmother who sourced from a matrilineal tribe, that a Native American tribe, and what happened to her in her story, and how that wound started between her mother and her, and then passed down through her children, all the way through my grandfather to my mother to me. And it's important. It's great when we can find historical evidence in this reality of what happens, but the vibrant activation, which in this case not only touches like the mother wounding of how mother treats children, but also crosses the line into like coercion over conversion from an earth honoring Native American tribe to Roman Catholicism, it has definitely been active in my life. Like I was raised Roman Catholic, and then I'm initiated to Ifa now, super polytheistic pagan, right? Animist religion. And why did that happen? And here it was, like sourcing from a direct river downstream. And so what I always love to tell people when they're like, I'm really Christian, or I'm really in my faith. Can I do these ancestral ways this way? And I'm like, yes, like all pathways. Your connection with your ancestors is your connection with your ancestors. And they all went through such enormous challenges and adversity, and their gift is you as their legacy. And you're here. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something really to speak with there around this idea that you don't have to be witchy or be seen as witchy energy in order to do this work, and that the unseen are affecting you day to day, whether you acknowledge that or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I find it remarkable how they're with us and how they push us and how they support us. Always, all the time. And the interesting part there too, of course, is why I feel particularly drawn to the work, is that also the ones that are not healed are also with us. and we're accessible to them, and they're accessible to us, and it goes both ways. And so there's a need to do the repair work for our own lives and our sovereignty in our own lives, but because they're our family and they need help. And that's what family does. Family helps family. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, part of the importance for doing the repair work is family helps family, along with creating an environment for my 4-year-old daughter to grow up having a different sense of healed, unseen community than I did. 'Cause I also grew up Roman Catholic. Uh-huh. So, and have looked to a lot of Vedic traditions through the years to, again, polytheistic, more earth honoring than Catholicism for sure. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that, my background of how I was raised, my church was 2 doors down from my house. Mm. And so raised in going to Catholic schools, it really taught me how to pray. And so I said earlier that I'm a praying woman, and it taught me an awful lot about faith. So I am so grateful for the tradition where I have a family now, and all the backing that I get in life from the Orisha and from my Aluo and from Daniel Baba there for me in those ways. And also sourcing that the reverence that I learned to spirit came through actually doing the work of showing up for church and really attending Mass and learning the ways in which Catholicism is beautiful in and of itself, because there's a lot of ritual that's involved to it. If people learn to embrace it that way, it opens up to be very beautiful. And you can forget all the dogma that's behind it. And but it did teach me an awful lot of that and laid the foundation through which the ways that I practice now, I hold in such sovereignty and grace around. And I attribute that to the way that I was raised. Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I have very recently been, we'll call it, turned on to really the Catholic mystical tradition. And I've been playing around with learning more about that some. And it's this whole, it's held, this traditional way that I grew up is being held in a different way, and that's good, right? And there's a beauty to it that I hadn't appreciated.
That I didn't. When you're young, you don't appreciate what you have, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I can say around just the ceremony and ritual of turning 50 is you start to really look at the ways in which the things that you suffered through or you felt you suffered through were actually blessings on the backside in the culmination of wisdom, right? And then you're like, oh, if only I would have paid more attention at the time to that. But they're there and they're hidden. But I think just like in any ancestral lineage or any tradition, there's the shadow side of it. And we're experiencing that today, that everything has an opportunity for healing in it. It's evolution that we address when things aren't working, because we move in ways that just ask for and pray for elevation always. Mm-hmm. Is the way that I tend to look at it. And so one of the things that recently kind of came out in all of this, we did a huge ceremony yesterday in honoring our Celtic ancestral ways to Lammas that is coming up. And so we deeply embodied and got in touch with some of the Celtic deities there, and just to celebrate gratitude. And then we asked for in divination and in journey, what are some of the things on a larger scale that we need to call in to be grateful for? And it was things like the Me Too movement and the way that those, as difficult as life seems to be right now, it's through the adversity that we're actually healing as a culture. And it seems hard, but all of this, I think, is part of the mother wound of this switch from the patriarchy being in play to the correcting of the balance between divine masculine and feminine in the world. And things like the Me Too movement have to come. So in terms of our Catholic faith, where does that fit in? Well, that fits in and looks like the nuns coming forward in the Me Too movement. And outing this historical long legacy of abuse by the men that should have held them in a protective state within the church. So it moves in all ways, spirit's on the move. And to that, yes, it's Lammas. That's something to brag about. We need to be grateful that there's now a platform for that too, to come out of the shadows.
Yeah, it feels like those things that have been subterranean have come to the surface. And when they come to the surface, it's the same thing you're talking about when you go to work with your mother's lines and things get lit up. When you're really focusing on how women show up in relationship with other women, it lights things up with the women in your life. We were having that discussion before we started. This is the same. It like comes to light and it lights things up because it can no longer be ignored. The curtain's been pulled back. And it can feel hard, but.
And for a lot of those reasons, I think people are trepidatious about engaging with the ancestors. Like I've gotten a few clients that are like, oh, I don't even know if I want to do this, because that in and of itself can be palpably felt and scary. What's on the other end of that is if you can imagine everybody like going into their homes and healing their ancestral lines and doing that work, like the healing that can then spread across the earth. Because one of the things that I love the most is when you complete a line and then you're synchronizing the blessings and you're dropping them down into the earth and healing the bones of all the ancestors, you know that that's spreading worldwide to your ancestors like thousands and thousands of years ago.
Yeah, this is the part of me that's like, how can you not want to do the work? How can you not want to have more of what is your divine blueprint for this lifetime revealed to you and held and enlivened by the unseen that are yours, that are your blood and your bones within you? And yes, it is a journey to be walked.
Part of that, I feel, is unspoken and hidden grief, hopelessness, and despair. So it's more than just complacency. It's when you've been oppressed for a really long time, there's a sense of that if I try this one thing that's supposed to hold all the answers and it doesn't work, then nothing can help. And so I see that a lot, particularly in doing women's work with women, is that almost I have survival skills, and we talk an awful lot about this in the domestic violence situations of why women stay with their abusers as opposed to leaving them. And so what we know is that when women leave relationships, the first year after they leave the relationship is the most dangerous, unsettling time, and statistically when they die. And so when we offer women well, why didn't you just leave? It's a disservice to say that, because the reality is that they're not weak. They have survival skills to know how to keep themselves safe while they're in that relationship. And they know how to walk the edges of that glass, and they know how to calm their batterers down. And so there's a sense of when you are living in a thing and you know how to navigate it, it sometimes feels safer than the unknown. And so if we can relate that concept to ancestor work, it's like what I'm doing now. Like, yes, there may be a bunch of unhealed ghosts around me, and sometimes it gets in my energy field, and sometimes they may not even realize that. They're like willfully like, I don't need to know it, sort of. The fact is that when you go into these waters that are uncharted for you, it's daunting and scary. And then you're getting in touch with some sourced grief from the unhealed ones that does reflect deeply on why you're at a place in your life where you are. So it means you have to do the work. And so I just, even in seeing that and owning that and allowing people to allow that grief to get really big in their life and acknowledge that that might be a barrier to them coming to the work, and giving them space to say that and own it, then lets them and helps them get on the other side to actually do the work. Because it just that too even needs to be named. Right? Yeah. And so when we name a thing, it brings it to light. Before it's named, it has a lot of power because it's insidious. But when you name it, it brings it to light, and then the action can occur after it.
Yeah. My experience is once you name it, for me, once I name it, it is, it loses most of its power.
And you see this time and time again in Celtic folklore, like where there's a principal actor in the story and the name is hidden, right? And that character tries to hide its name. And once the person names the name, then all the power is gone out of the thing. And these are tales and myths that have been written for thousands of years. The whole naming ceremony part of things, because if people don't know what their antagonist is, then it's allowed to antagonize them invisibly. And then once they name it, then they're able to have the antidote, if you will, to bring about the transformation and the change.
So good.
And that's alive and vibrant within the mother wound. Like, so when we talk about the why, oftentimes women also need to address how they take out this burden of the wound on their daughters. We have to deal with the shame of no one likes to speak bad about their mother, right? And because we're battling patriarchy, and oftentimes I hear the argument, well, we don't need to turn on each other and address that as much as we need to address how unhealed masculine forces are affecting and still oppressing us. I think it's both and. Like, I don't buy into the myth that we only have enough energy to address one side of it. I'm like, we can do all of these things. We can look at all sides of it. And so part of it is how we turn on each other. So we turn on each other by jealousy and envy and competitiveness and asking people to play small because it's not safe, and so many ways of undermining each other's authority in life. So like historically, again, through the battered women's movement, it's like over and over and over, I hear mothers who talk about their daughters that are in domestic violence situations. Either you made your bed, lie in it, sort of a thing, which is like, what are you saying? Or if you just would have listened to me, it wouldn't have happened. So just in that rescuer type mode of the victim, they're undermining and stripping her of her own authority. And it tends to come in relation also to the wounding that the mother is carrying around the story of how women should show up in the world, which is just do what you're told. Like, and if you would just like conform, then all of these things wouldn't happen to you. And at some point, almost men can step out of the picture and not do anything at all because women are abusing women through carrying those stories and those wounds down. Like it turns in on itself.
Yeah. It turns in on itself. To me, also, what I've seen is this illusion of women supporting women and lip service to that, but the actions and the energetics not matching that. And so then it's like, wait, this is happening on the surface and here's what I'm hearing, but it's just an illusion for that wound just back behind the scenes in the action and the energetics between women. And it's a thing. It's a thing that we need to address, this illusion too.
It's one of the things I think that is tender and alive for me, just because of some of the felt experiences I've seen along the tending of the ancestral lines. of how they've carried those burdens. And when the elevated guide is doing the healing work, the amount of levity that needs to be given to the ancestral mother is both in, I need forgiveness from my daughters, and also I need to say I'm sorry. Like, it's a thing that happens in just the whole forgiveness piece that just moves me in ways to really highlight and emphasize how integral a part of the work is to, like, also work along the lines of not only patriarchy, but colonialism and racism and those other fault lines that we address. With the biggest piece of the work being understanding the power of forgiveness and the levity that comes in when we can hold both in the practice, in the forgiveness ceremonies.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready for the random questions?
Random questions.
So if you could sit down with any woman, alive or dead, for a chat and tea, who would it be?
Ooh. It would be one of my elevated grandmothers, actually. I have an amazing elevated guide that sources from my mother's people. And she's just so amazing. I want to move in the ways that she moves. And I feel mostly when I need support in my own life, like, I would love to sit down and have tea with her and say, Grandma, like, help me, like, show me how to navigate this thing that's happening in my life. So it would actually source from her. And we can do that, of course, in unseen ways, but to have her physically in front of me would be so incredible. So awesome. So awesome.
I love it.
Yeah.
And the second question is, do you have a spirit animal that's with you, either of the moment or always, that's up right now? Several, yeah.
Several. And so just as part of just animist traditions and recognizing that everything has consciousness, I'm palpably aware at all times of the others that are with me. And part of that is this team of animals that kind of like, if I didn't know it, they would be in physical form sometimes right underneath my feet. And to learn how to navigate that respectfully, like, they have their own sovereignty is what, when I teach other people about that, like, it's, like, power animals are great to get, but do you understand they have their own sovereignty as well? Like, they move in their own ways. And having respect and learning how to navigate a relationship with them is just as important as how I navigate the relationship with my 17-year-old son. So,
yeah, ancestors too. It's like you're navigating and deepening relationships. You got to show up too,
It almost feels like, you got to be very comfortable with being naked because you're seen all the time, always, every second of the day, right? Like, so you might as well just be comfortable navigating the world being incredibly naked.
I love it. Those are words to live by right there.
Kind of changes things, right?
Learn to navigate the world naked, people. There it is. There's the gold. I love it. So, Shannon, how do we reach out and connect with you?
Oh, great. You can contact me at Shannon at redearthhealing.org. And my website, of course, is redearthhealing.org. And also, the place that I've been practicing out of for the past 5 years is heartpathstudio.org. So it's here in Athens.
Great. And will you speak just a little bit about your retreat for healing the mother wound in October?
I will. So we have space for about 10 folks to come and do a 3-day dive in deep immersion around healing the mother wound. And so it is at a beautiful place in Clayton, Georgia that has my heart. And the two beautiful women that just kind of hold the spirits of place there in the Georgia mountains, the foothills of the Georgia mountains there, are amazing, amazing individuals. So 3 days, it will be in the fall. All the North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina leaves are in full changing of their rhythm and their colors, like fire lighting. And that's actually going to be beneficial because we're going to use that. We're going to definitely use that. But we're weaving in the story of our ancestral mothers and their wounding and the collective healing around that and the relationships we hold and how we carry those woundings into our waking life. And we're going to be working with and healing a matrilineal line around the specific mother wound that shows up most in your life. So it's 3 days. It's all Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we're actually also going to consecrate, and you're going to make a ritual item to continue to tend that particular wound through that. So lots of deeply embodied ritual folded into those 3 days.
And then in November here near Asheville, you'll be doing an ancestral lineage repair intensive with Sarah for. I know. I'll be there.
Oh, great. Yay. Yes, the 3-day ancestor. So if you want to learn what Shannon and Shannon have been talking about, and what we are so backed behind is a 3-day introduction to how you do the ancestral lineage repair work. And so honored to be doing that with dear Sarah for.
Yeah, beautiful. Shannon, thank you for today. That was amazing.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was so much fun.
Hello again. And I loved being with Shannon. I love another good Shannon. 2 Shannons together is always good for me. And the work Shannon Willis is doing around healing the mother wound is deep work. And the work, the ancestral work, when she talks about it, dismantling the wounds of the patriarchy while deeply holding the sacred masculine as divine, that just resonated into my whole being. So I'm so glad that she was able to come on and share herself with us today. If you want to connect more deeply with Shannon Willis, and I definitely recommend that you do, you can get all the information and links to connect with her over at honorthefeminine.com for episode 113. This episode is part of the Ancestral Healing mini-series that was episodes 108 through 113. And it was really great to have the thread of the ancestral lineage repair work, the ancestral healing, be woven in all of those episodes from different angles, right? Because each of us has been trained as practitioners in the work of Daniel 4 of ancestral lineage repair, but each of us individually brings ourselves to that. And so if Shannon resonated with you today, reach out to her. If another practitioner resonated with you, please reach out to them. The profound gifts that my experience of the profound gifts of healing my blood lineages, it's almost like I can't put words to it. And so if this intrigues you, move in that direction and reach out to whoever resonated with you. All right. Thank you again for joining us today. Blessings to you and your people.